first decade of the 21st century, there emerged a small group of writers who began to be described as the New Atheists. These writers were given that label as they were credited with the starting of a fresh brand of godlessness. This small group of authors has attracted much media attention with their very readable, best-selling books, proclaiming the gospel of New Atheism. The year 2004 saw the publication of The End of Faith by Sam Harris. In 2006, Daniel Dennett saw the publication of his book, Breaking the Spell, Religion as a Natural Phenomenon. And Richard Dawkins saw the publication of his book, The God Delusion. Then, in 2007, the most recent apostle of the movement, the late Christopher Hitchens, saw his book, God is Not Great, appear in bookstores everywhere. New Atheism was a term coined to designate a school of thought that was fundamentally intolerant and extremely mean-spirited in the attitude its members adopted in their concerted campaign against both religious belief in and of itself, and even the mere respect of a religious belief. These writers were identified as the heralds of a popular movement that was distinguished by its antagonistic rhetoric than by any originality of its ideas. Paleo-atheists had been talking about the subject of faith for decades while engaging in civil discourse and by using reasoned arguments. For the most part, few in the general population paid much attention. What finally did attract much attention were the outrageous claims and the combative rhetoric of the New Atheists. The atheist writers of the old school were drowned out by the din of the New Atheist caterwaul.
One of the things we've all met is the accusation that we are strident or arrogant or vitriolic or shrill.
Mock them, ridicule them. In public. Need to be ridiculed with contempt.
Consider the possibility of improving the Ten Commandments. This may seem to be setting the bar kind of high because this is the only part of the Bible, the only text that God felt the need to physically write himself and in stone. Consider the second commandment, thou shalt not erect any graven images. Is this really the second most important thing upon which to admonish all future generations of human beings? I mean, is this as good as it gets, ethically and spiritually? The truth is that almost any precept we would put in place of the second commandment would improve the wisdom of the Bible. Or what about just try not to deep fry all of your food?
In the intellectual sense, in the ideas sense, religion is bad for us and therefore we need a cure. Is that what you're saying?
A cure. Yes, indeed. I think a lot of people are really afflicted by their religion, and I would love to see them cured.
Now, I am absolutely convinced that the main source of hatred in the world is religion and organized religion. Absolutely convinced of it. And I think it should be religion treated with ridicule and hatred and contempt, and I claim that right.
New Atheism preaches the condemnation of not just belief in God, but even for the respect for belief in God. Belief in God is not only wrong, it is evil, they evangelized. The New Atheists will never be satisfied with mere acceptance for atheism. They will not rest until all faith in God has been eradicated from the face of the earth. In 2012, Dr. Sam Harris, a neuroscientist and the latest darling of new atheism, published his book, Free Will. The thesis of Dr. Harris's book is that human free will is but an illusion. Dr. Harris is well aware, as are Christians and atheists alike, that without the existence of free will in men, the teachings of Christianity would make no sense, and the church would be shaken to its foundations. In this program, we will examine the notion that free will is but an illusion. If it is an illusion, we can easily hazard a guess that most people are suffering from this so-called illusion.
Free will? Yes, of course I have free will.
Yes, I do.
Yes, of course I do.
Sure, I have free will. I am free.
I have free will.
Yes, I believe I have free will.
Yes, I believe in God-given free will.
Yes, of course I believe I do have free will.
Yes, I believe in free will. Forget about it.
Recently, GOC-TV went to visit one of our associates, a certain Roman, Mr. Joseph Nicholas. We asked Mr. Nicholas to view Sam Harris's YouTube presentation, wherein Dr. Harris briefly articulates his thesis on free will, and to give us his opinion.
We've got many questions on free will. Most people, most of the time, feel very clearly that they are the authors of their own actions, that they are the thinkers of their thoughts and the intenders of their intentions. And, well, the problem is free will is just a non-starter philosophically and scientifically. There's no, unlike many other illusions, there's no way you can describe the universe so as to make sense of this notion of free will. What people mean is that their conscious selves are free to choose their actions. Now, people don't deny that they're influenced by their genes and the environment and the social systems they live in, but they still feel that at every moment there is freedom to choose. Now, what can this mean? From the position of conscious awareness of your inner life, this can't be true, because everything you're consciously aware of in every moment is the result of causes of which you are not aware and over which you exert no conscious control. So, just a simple experiment. You think of someone in your life. Just remember someone you know. Now, the person who comes to mind feels like someone you chose. You just took this person off the shelf of memory, in a sense. But you can't account for why you thought of that person as opposed to somebody else. Okay, let's say you know 100 people in this world. Before I posed the question, you weren't thinking of anybody. I ask you to think of someone you know, and somebody emerges into conscious awareness. We know, as a matter of neurophysiology, that was manufactured by the brain at the end of a series of causes of which you are not conscious, of which you are the mere witness. You are merely receiving that memory of a person. And so it is with every other choice you would make in life. To choose to move your right hand as opposed to your left hand, as long as you want to deliberate about that, you could deliberate for an hour. But the final impulse that's effective, if I go back and forth between my two hands and then finally say, oh, it's going to be my right, I'm in no position to say why it wasn't my left. And we know, and there have been a variety of neurophysiological experiments and now neuroimaging experiments attesting to this, we know that monitoring brain function would have allowed scientists in the lab to predict which hand I was going to move seconds before I'm consciously aware of my motor plan. So this is a problem for this folk psychological notion of free will, this idea that we are the authors in every moment of our inner lives and of what we subsequently do in the world, because we know that we are downstream of causes of which we're not conscious and cannot possibly be conscious. Now, some people want to say, well, okay, so there's this stream of neurophysiological events that are begetting thoughts and intentions and emotions. But we are in a position to change subsequent events. Okay, well, that's actually not true. The we that's in a position to change those subsequent events is simply more events. I mean, there's just one event following another as a matter of neurophysiology. So the idea that I can decide, I can't pick my impulse to move my right hand versus my left hand, but I can decide to stop moving it. That decision to stop is also something that is arising based on prior causes. So however you look at this, you have to admit that the contents of consciousness are born of an unconscious mental life, which is almost certainly at bottom a matter of neurophysiology in our case. Now, there are many subsequent questions that follow on this concern about free will. So if, in fact, we can't choose what we choose, but simply choose, how can choice be important? I mean, well, so then why not just sit back and wait and see what happens? Why choose to do anything? Why get out of bed in the morning? Well, to choose to do nothing is itself a choice. And it's in fact actually a very hard thing to do. I mean, you just sit there and wait to see what happens, and you're going to get impatient, you're going to get restless, you're going to want to eat something, you're going to be moved by impulses, which you'll then have to choose to resist in order to sit and just wait and see what happens. So you can't step out of the stream of being lived by your unconscious mental processes, which are showing up as conscious intentions, emotions, moods, desires, etc. The notion that choice is important can be conserved, however, because choice is what, at the level of our conscious life, choice is what precedes some of the biggest changes in our experience. I mean, to choose to marry one person as opposed to another, or to choose to have a child, or to choose to go to college, or to drop out of college. I mean, these are behaviors that are preceded by thoughts and conversations and a lot of effort, mental effort, and weighing of pros and cons. All of this actually does precipitate the next moment of experience and the next and what in fact we choose to do. And yet all of it is being born of processes of which we are not consciously aware. So choice is still just, you have to choose. Like if you want coffee in the morning, you have to choose to make it. You can't just sit and wait for coffee in most cases. So this does not, the illusion of free will, or the fact that free will is an illusion, does not undercut all of our mental life that we think is important. It's just, when you pay close attention, you have to admit that you can't account for why in any instant your life has the character it has, and not some other character. And you can't, in those moments where you are making an effort to do something, you can't account for why you're able to make that effort in those moments and not in another moment, and why you're able to make that effort to precisely the degree you can and not more, and why someone else is able to make a greater effort.
Well, I've watched and listened to the complete presentation as he has on, what is this, YouTube? On YouTube. It's a 12-minute presentation. And he essentially keeps repeating the premise over and over again, which is kind of obvious. Once again, he states that we are not the authors of our conscious intentions, because every conscious intention is preceded by an unconscious thought that motivates and drives the conscious intention. What I maintain is that's an obvious fact, and it describes in a way what happens to us in discrete events, what I call micro events, during the course of a day, during the course of an hour, during the course of 5 minutes, during the course of a year. So these events
may be preceded by something that's not in our consciousness. If we look at macro events, that is, as we view ourselves as human beings living in a society, as I mentioned before, we do have, based upon our experience, our learning, we do have the ability to make a choice based upon the complete universe of what we have learned since our birth. We take that experience in total and go on to make what I consider a voluntary decision to do one thing as opposed to the other. If you look at them, if you look at my decision as a discrete micro event, then Dr. Harris appears to have made his case. But what I'm saying is, it is in the nature of the human being, it's the nature of Homo sapiens sapiens, that we constantly learn from birth, and we store all that learning, all that experience in our memory. And you can look at it, actually you can look at it in a way in which our conscious mind dips into our memory, brings together the facts and experiences that we have learned, and has come up with a decision that is in accord with those experiences, that is in accord with what we feel about the world. However, I'm going to leave that for a later discussion. Let me just say at this date, at this particular time, having witnessed the 12-minute presentation on YouTube, that Dr. Harris presents a case where it's impossible by his definition of free will to exercise free will. And that is a description of micro events that happen every day that precede a small choice of having a cup of coffee, a large choice of getting married. Well, that's besides the point. What I'm saying is that we're a product not only of those small events that happen every day, but we're a product of our total lives, of our total experiences, of learning. Are we people who believe in God and or believe and have faith, or are we secular and we have a certain code of ethics? We believe in a certain way, and do we live in a society that allows us to exercise our free will according to our own moral or ethical code? That's the more important issue, not the issue of the small events determine my cup of coffee or my taking a shower. These things are inconsequential. The most important thing, the thing that makes us human beings, is the ability to take all our learning experiences, all our experiences at school, our experiences in dealing and having relations with our fellow man, that we're able to encapsulate those things in our memory, and when we are going to make a decision, we can dip into that memory and make a decision based upon what we have learned during the course of our lifetimes, what is moral and what is ethical, and then act accordingly. In all fairness, I must say, I would have to now read the book Dr. Harris has written. Actually, it's a small 70-odd pages. I would like to read that and see how he extends his premise. And in all fairness, after I read the complete book, I'd like to make further comments after I've had a full appraisal and thought about myself about free will. Thank you. Before I actually read the book, I had to sit and think about what is the meaning of free will. Do we have it? Does it have a value? So I did not read the book because I do have preconceptions and biases. And I would say, if you asked me if I had free will, I would say, yes, I do. And it's kind of like asking someone, do you have a sense of humor? Everyone believes they have a sense of humor. And I believe everybody believes they have a free will. So how do I tease this apart? How do I examine this without even approaching the book? Well, I start with myself. And I start with a single human being before I go to the larger society. And I say, well, let's say I were cast away on an island as a baby, and on the island there was fruit. So I was able to feed myself, and there was no one to teach me anything about free will, about reasoning. So what I had was a place or a condition in which I really didn't have to learn that much. I didn't have many choices. There was a palm tree, and it grew fruit that was edible to a child. And as I grew up on this island, I had always had access to food, and there was also fresh water. So there are not really many choices to make or many ways to exercise what I think of as free will, which is an intentionality that I am conscious of, and that I can then act or behave on that intention. So I'm thinking. I said, well, really, the only place to exercise your free will or to see it, the phenomenon in its full flower, is to be a subject or a person in a society. That's what I came to. In a society where you have to react with other people, then or other conditions, other than being on an island, you can exercise what I believe is free will or not. I believe that the basic impulses of the human being is to survive, and that is to eat, and then to procreate. Those are the basic impulses. We can almost call them instincts. Beyond and above that, when you're in a society of fellow human beings, certain rules for the continuation of the species, the certain rules have to apply. You don't want to kill each other. You want to be in a community where you can exercise your free will without impinging on the free will of someone else. So that's my general idea of free will and its application. So without preconditions and without bias, that's how I started to come to read Free Will, the book by Dr. Sam Harris. So now I have to, I'm going to be reading out it because I don't want to quote him improperly, but I want to read his premise. And he makes it very clear very early on that free will, according to him, I'm quoting, free will is an illusion. Our wills are simply not of our making. Thoughts and intentions emerge from background causes of which we are unaware and over which we exert no conscious, now that's an operative word we should remember, no conscious control. We do not have the freedom we think we have. Free will is actually more than an illusion or less, in that it cannot be made conceptually coherent. Either our wills are determined by prior causes, or we are not responsible for them, or they are the product of chance, and we are not responsible for them. If a man's choice to shoot the president is determined by a certain pattern of neural activity, which in turn is the product of prior causes, perhaps an unfortunate coincidence of bad genes, an unhappy childhood, lost sleep, cosmic ray bombardment, what can it possibly mean to say that his will is free? No one has ever described the way in which our mental and physical processes could arise that would attest to the existence of such freedom. Most illusions are made of sterner stuff. So there we have it. And so he's setting preconditions that may or may not actually be true. He's saying that, in essence, that our conscious idea of free will is really a fiction, because all our conscious intentions, all our conscious acts are not voluntary, but they're preceded by something in the unconscious. We have unconscious impulses that, in a sense, according to him, drive your conscious impulses. And because our unconscious impulses, by definition, are unknown to us, therefore we really don't have free will. It's really an illusion. He makes some small exceptions and those exceptions are for immediate proximate causes, such as I hear a lawnmower outside and it's disturbing my ability to read. So he says, well, you do have the will or the voluntary action, intention, the immediate and proximate attention to go to the window and shut the window so that you don't hear the sound of a lawnmower, which is interrupting your train of thought. Other than that, any deeper actions he feels are from the unconscious. So he's used terms like conscious, unconscious, free will, and before we go any further, I really think that we have to define the terms. Otherwise, we don't know what we're really talking about, because things like unconscious, preconscious, conscious are terms that, well, it may mean something to you, it may mean something else to me. So let's go and, if you'll bear with me, define Oxford Pocket American Dictionary. A state of consciousness is awake and aware of one's surroundings and identity. We are self-aware creatures. Let's see further. Having to do with actions and emotions, realized or recognized by the doer, intentional. That's consciousness. And then there's a state of consciousness. It's a state of being conscious, awareness, perception, the totality of a person's thoughts and feelings, or class of these, such as moral consciousness. Okay, so we have an idea that consciousness is a state of awareness. We're aware of our surroundings, and we are aware, according to this, that we are the doer of the actions we're doing and of the intentions. So now let's go, as we define that, to the unconscious. Not conscious, that part of the mind which is inaccessible to the conscious mind, but which affects behavior. So this definition seems to agree with Dr. Harris, that the unconscious mind is not available to the conscious mind. That's the definition. So now we want to bring you to something that is not brought out in the book, is not discussed in the book. And that is a quality of mind. And let me define mind now as something, all things that the brain does, we can consider mind, if we use that as a definition. Now, I must, at this point, read you something. This is from a magazine called The Scientific American Mind. And it's just discussing vision. And it states, until about 35 years ago, scientists believed that there was only a single visual processing area called the visual cortex, situated in the back of the brain, the occipital area. We now know more than 30 areas in the brains of primates, including humans, are involved in handling aspects of vision, such as perception of motion, color, depth, and depth. So we're getting a good idea how complex the brain is. As a matter of fact, most people, including scientists, would say that the brain is the most complex organ in the universe, certainly in the world of human endeavor. And the brain is responsible for all the functions that make us human beings. Perception, cognition, awareness, all these things are qualities of the brain, and a very important quality is our ability to interpret information that is brought to us from the outside world, and information that is very, very often in the form of a hypothetical construct. For example, I believe that the world is round. That's a construct. And now are there ways to prove that construct? Well, yeah, now we know that if we take a ship or a plane and we go in one direction, we will eventually wind up in the direction in which we started. Hence, the world is round. So we have proven a hypothetical construct. Now, in the field of of psychology and human events that have to do with the brain, which are very complex indeed, we have an organ which, as I said before, can interpret, can develop constructs, ideas. It's absolutely an amazing organ, and it's an organ which talks to various parts of itself. For example, as was brought out in this quote that I made from Scientific American Mind, is that we thought that the visual cortex was located in the occipital area, and that's the only area that was responsible for sight. But, and that was 35 years ago. As we have new knowledge, which is an important point, as we have new knowledge, our hypothetical constructs change. So we find that it's not only the locus of vision is not only in the occipital cortex, but it's sort of the occipital cortex we consume is like the central base, and from which it produces various communications in other areas of the brain. So it's a fairly complex process. Now, that's only vision. Take into consideration judgment, interpretation, recognition, perception. All these things are very, very, very complicated, and that's why we have the science or the study of the brain, and is generally called neuroscience. And Dr. Harris is a neuroscientist. However, even, well, most people, I don't say even, but most people have biases and work from those biases, even people in the scientific field. So it's not a field in which people are absolutely without prejudice embark upon a field of study in which they're trying to prove something. I'm going to define memory here, which I think is an important part of the construct of the brain, which Dr. Harris doesn't really discuss. And I would say memory is a reservoir of things to be retrieved, brought to consciousness, where they can be assessed. All things learned. It is not a stimulus to the consciousness, but rather a reservoir of ideas and a reservoir of convictions. And let me go further to make sure that you get the agreed upon definition. I'm going to quote again from the Oxford Dictionary. Memory, the faculty by which things are recalled or kept in mind, a recollection or remembrance, the storage capacity of a computer or the storage capacity of the brain, a remembrance of a person or a thing. My contention is this, is that Dr. Harris has formed an idea based upon two hypothetical constructs. This is the theory of the conscious and the unconscious mind. And these are derived from, most people know, from Dr. Freud, who enunciated this process approximately 100 years ago. So Dr. Harris is assuming that the unconscious mind is a dichotomy and there is no relationship between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. Well, according to the definition we have here, that's true. However, if we break out of that dichotomy and say, well, instead of we have the unconscious-conscious dichotomy, why don't we have, I propose a hypothetical construct that the mind has different levels of awareness. And so we have awareness that is immediate, and then we have awareness that is not immediate, and but they do communicate with each other in a way that makes us an intentional being. And the reasons why I feel that we have various states of awareness is to protect the brain from, how can I say, being unplugged, is a good word, by too much stimuli. In other words, and Dr. Harris devotes a criteria. Let me find it. Now, Dr. Harris, who is a philosopher as well as a neuroscientist, or at least he studied philosophy. I know he has a PhD, and he also has a graduate, doesn't have a graduate degree, but I don't know the type of degree he has in philosophy, but he has studied philosophy. I'm going to quote from page 13 of Free Will. Consider what it would take to actually have free will. You need to be aware, that's the operative word, of all the factors that determine your thoughts and actions, and you would need to have complete control over these factors. I would say you would have to have complete knowledge over those factors. But there's a paradox here that vitiates the very notion of freedom. For what would influence the influences? More influences. None of these adventitious mental states are the real you. Well, I would contend to that. You are not controlling the storm, you are lost in it. Well, let's examine why all the available factors in making a decision are not proximate in the mind that's aware as we understand aware. I've already posited that there is different states. I've already posited that there are different states of awareness, and that they are contiguous, rather than the dichotomy that Dr. Harris has made. That there is the unconscious mind and the conscious mind. And so, imagine if we would have to abide by the rules Dr. Harris has put forth, that we would have to be aware of all the factors that determine your thoughts. Well, that would presume that we would have to be aware in our immediate consciousness rather, all the little minutiae during the day, during the history of our lives. They would have to be present in the immediate mind for us to make, according to Dr. Harris, to make an intention that is of our own choosing, i.e. our free will. Well, there are people who do have an inordinate amount of minutiae, discrete particles of information in their immediate awareness. And these people find it very hard to function in real life. As a matter of fact, there's so much stimuli from all the discrete bits of information, how warm the day is, do I have to put my right foot under my left foot to walk in a certain direction? Do I have to look up at the red light? All these things are items in our consciousness during the course of the day. Now, if we were to have to capture all those things, there's really no way we can function in society. It's just not done. So I feel that Dr. Harris, in constructing his idea of free will, is forcing the deck in his, to use an expression, in his favor. I would say that the fact that we are not immediately aware of all the things that cause us to behave in a certain way is to our benefit and allows us to function in society, because if these things were impinged on our immediate consciousness, we really couldn't proceed to live our lives. It would be just too much information. It's like overloading a computer. It's just too much information. We don't have enough gigabytes, if you will, and you'd blow a fuse. So, now, what's the purpose of memory, which he doesn't discuss at all? Well, the purpose of memory, I think most of us would agree, is a reservoir in the brain that collects all the information that we have learned during the course of our lifetimes. Now, thank goodness that we have memory, because if we didn't have memory, well, how would we proceed to tap the learning experiences that we've had in a lifetime? And it's because of these learning experiences that we can make a discrete decision on whether we want to do something or not, whether we want to intend to do something or not. So I believe that Dr. Harris, in not including memory in his discussion, either by intention, or just something that he did not decide was relevant to the process of free will, if we have it, we are forced into the conclusion that he forces us to make. That is, we really don't have free will, that they are really causes, free will really, we don't have free will because the intentions we have are not really the product of our immediate awareness, but are drives that come from unconscious mind. Now, as I said, I could form a hypothetical construct in which we just have different levels of awareness which are constantly in communication with us and in communication with our memory. I want to stop for a moment to discuss what we know about the brain, because there's tons and tons and tons of material written about the functions of the brain, how various parts of the brain function, how they relate to one another, how the perceptive part of our brain that perceives through the senses, smell, touch, feeling, sight, etc. This is just one part of our brain, and then how it communicates it how it communicates to other parts of the brain, so that we can come up, so that we can function in the world as thinking beings. Now, once again, there are tons and tons and tons of material in the field of neuroscience that are written about the brain. However, do they really know the very basic thing about the brain, which is I feel is most important before you can come up with any conclusion? And that is, how does the brain, which is essentially made up of atoms, molecules, bioelectric fields, how does this material organ, come up with information? How is that possible, that we go from molecules that are moving around in our neurons, in our axons, in the myelin sheath? I mean, you can describe all these things, but how is it possible, since basically the brain is made up of, as we know, molecules? They're spinning around, they're creating electrical fields, and these electrical fields are transmitted. But how is this bioelectrical work transmuted into something called information? No one really knows that. Or if they do, I'd like to hear about it. But the process of actually going from a material substance, electrons whizzing around, a nucleus that communicates to the peripheral of its cell to maintain its health. How is all this process lead to thought, lead to an idea, lead to information? How is that possible? That answer is not, that question has not been answered. So, as that has not been answered, we can all, in the field of philosophy, neuroscience, cultural anthropology, evolutionary psychology, all these aspects can come up with hypothetical constructs, but they really don't know the fundamental basis of how the brain works. They know how it communicates with each other. They know how it impinges on the outside world. We have the occipital lobe that has something to do with vision. We have the prefrontal cortex that has to do with intellect and reasoning. We have the sites for hearing. But as I quoted from this magazine, everything is in all parts of the brain are in communication with each other. So we know all this, but we don't know that fundamental fact. How are molecules and atoms responsible for information? So until that question is answered, I think we're kind of in the Wild West where we perform experiments and experiments may verify our internal biases. I want to go to experiments now that Dr. Harris has either performed or that he mentioned. Or he either performs or that he quotes people have other perform. So Dr. Harris, in support of his thesis that the unconscious process is really responsible for conscious intention, he gives some examples of laboratory experiments. And the first one is, I'm going to quote because I don't want to misinterpret what he says. The physiologist Benjamin Libet famously used an EEG to show the activity in the brain's motor cortex, okay, responsible for motion. That activity in the brain's motor cortex can be detected 300 milliseconds before a person feels he has decided to move. Another lab extended this work using functional magnetic resonance, okay, fMRI. Subjects were asked to press one of two buttons while watching a clock composed of random sequence of letters appearing on a screen. They reported which letter was visible at the moment they decided to press the button, to press one button or the other. So they had to discriminate whether it's A, B. If it's B, you press one button. If it's A, you press another button. The experimenters found two brain regions that contained information. But what the nature of this information is not really defined here. The experimenters found two brain regions that contained information about which button subjects would press a full 7 to 10 seconds before the decision was consciously made. Wow, well, interesting. All right, let's tease that apart a little bit and say, well, why is there first of all, why is there a discrepancy of 7 to 10 seconds? If there's a delay, why isn't the delay always 7 seconds or 8 seconds or 9 seconds or 10 seconds? This to me is interesting. It seems what's interesting to Dr. Harris is that there's a delay. Well, to go into the reason why there's a delay, we would have to discuss, in this particular case, what is the experimental design that has been created here? What are they using that may include a bias in their findings? So we don't have any information of that. We're just presented with a curious fact that there's a delay in which we consciously decide to push a button, and there's a brain activity in the motor cortex, and that activity is detected full 7 to 10 seconds before we actually press the button. It's the letter A or the letter B. So we have two buttons. So in order to really determine whether there's a bias in it or not, in the experimental design, we really have to ask a lot of questions that are not answered in this book, in this particular paragraph. For example, how many subjects were used? Were these subjects randomly chosen, or were they, let's say, all college students, which are generally available to universities? And this experiment may have been taken on a university. So are these all college students? Do they all have the same IQ? In other words, are they able to perceive things? Some people can perceive things more rapidly than others. I can go on and on. What is the bias of the person who has designed the experiment? Is he absolutely has no bias? Is he not part of the experiment? So all these questions are not answered. What is the motivation of the subject? Are they bored at any particular time? Are they feel under pressure? Are they a type of fields they have to perform they have to perform accurately for the person who's producing the experiment, in which case they'd be under some sort of anxiety, which is not recorded. So all these things are not discussed, And as to the extent they're not discussed, we have to take the results here with a grain of salt. Incidentally, I just reading without hearing the experimental design, I can come up with the conclusion that would what's the word I'm going to use? That would explain the reason why there's a seven. That would explain the reason why there's a 7 to 10 second delay, and that reason would be this. I've already mentioned memory, and I've defined what memory is, so my hypothetical construct would be that the stimulus, the letter A, the letter B, is perceived by the retina, is transmitted to the visual cortex, then it has to go to the motor cortex, and then it has to go down the spinal column, and we have to take into account all the various and sundry things that I've mentioned, like anxiety, is there a bias in people want to do right, want to give the right results in the experiment. So disregarding that, besides the processing that I already mentioned, going the nerve impulses, which are communicated to a machine almost immediately. And by the way, the machine is an MRI, which means magnetic resonance imaging. So which may be interfering with the whole process of this conscious decision that the subject is trying to make. So, but there's also another explanation. In the processing, the subject is going into memory, finding out the symbol A, finding the symbol B, then going back to the motor prefrontal to the motor cortex, which maybe communicates with the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for intellect and reasoning, etc., etc. So there's a whole process that's not being discussed, which I think should be discussed, and if it is fully discussed, we may come up with a different conclusion. One of the criteria for maintaining whether an experiment is valid or not is A, reliability. Can you do it again and again and again and again and again and get the same results? So we're hearing about just one experiment. He doesn't mention whether it's been repeated 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times. So what is the validity of this experiment? So I call that into question. He continues, more recently, direct recordings from the cortex, I'm assuming he means the motor cortex, showed that the activity of merely 256 neurons was sufficient to predict with 80% accuracy a person's decision to move 700 milliseconds before he became aware of it. So 700 milliseconds is quite a big difference from 7 to 10 seconds. 700 milliseconds is roughly 3/4 of 1 second. So here we have we're not given the full circumstances of this experiment, but the delay here would first of all, I have a note here, 80% accuracy. Why the variability? Why is it only 80% and why not 100%? I mean, if the neurons are doing what Dr. Harris says they're doing, then why not? Why isn't there 100% accuracy? Now I can surmise why there's a 3/4 of a second delay, and that is, again, the stimulus is presented. It's presented via an electrical impulse. All this is bioelectrical impulses. The impulse goes, the stimulus is recorded on the retina, and then an electrical impulse goes back into, well, actually the eye is part of the brain, goes into another part of the brain that the motor cortex was responsible for movement. So since there may be just a stimulus, seeing something, and then a response in which the person doesn't have to discriminate A and B, so the delay for me is absolutely normal. The process of detection by a machine, it's about an electrical machine, is fast because it doesn't have to do any neural processing. It just records electrical activity. So there's electrical activity in the neurons. However, those neurons have to do a little bit of work. They have to detect it, then they have to send the signal down the brain stem and send it down into the arm, and then you have to press the button. So the 3-second delay, I have no problem with. It's just the 7 to 10 second delay, as we've discussed before, as I have difficulty with his explanation because I find there's another one. So Dr. Harris would argue we're all a product of our discriminate bits of what he would call learning or information or processes that are located in our subconscious, and that these in effect drive and direct our conscious mind. So I would say not necessarily so, but if we look upon the mind as a level of different levels of awareness that are constant communication with us and our memories, in which reside everything that we've learned. So you either believe that the unconscious mind is something that's discrete from the unconscious mind, which may or may not be true within the logic of that hypothetical construct. I'm saying it's not true because I'm going to a different construct altogether. He also goes on to mention kind of a vague condemnation of the idea of sin, and because it's a religious construct, he says it comes from religious metaphysics, that that is the cause of the idea of retribution or revenge in our present criminal justice system. I would say that's not the case at all. I'd say the criminal justice system today is a question of if someone is harming someone in society, then that person must be taken out of society in a penitentiary until such time where he either has served a significant amount of time and in that amount of time he is presumed to be able to change his behavior. Now there's a whole question of whether our prisons operate now in terms of to rehabilitate a prisoner or just to warehouse them. That's another issue. Has nothing to do with whether a religious principle is responsible unjustly for this man going into prison. As a matter of fact, the first prisons in this country were called penitentiaries, and they were called penitentiaries because each cell had a Bible in it, and the person who committed a crime was able, the theory, to go into his cell and be a penitent, reading the Bible and coming to an awareness that he's committed, in religious terms, something that is sinful, in secular terms, something that is unethical. But anyway, it was not a place of retribution or revenge or punishment. It was a place where hopefully the inmate, the prisoner, could change his mind. Now, in like manner today, if prisons were run properly, in which they were sources of an education for a person, in which he can communicate with his conscious mind to the new things that he's learned, and made a decision that crime is not in his best interest. So I don't know why Dr. Harris has made the bridge between sin and religiosity and the cause for a person who's committed a crime to be incarcerated. I don't think sin has anything to do with it. Dr. Harris maintains that we're not responsible for our actions because they're driven by unconscious motives. So therefore, how can we be responsible for the crimes we may commit? Well, if you agree with his premise, well, that's true. How can you be responsible? But I do not agree with this premise. I do think we are conscious agents, and I've described how that's possible with my hypothetical construct of a continuation of awareness from immediate awareness to awareness that has more to do with memory, and that memory and awareness communicate with each other to come up with decisions. In other words, it's not that memory pushes up into our consciousness, it's that our conscious minds, but that our conscious mind dips down into our memories to create judgments, to create values, to determine what we feel is right and wrong. If we had no memory, where there's no way of learning anything, whether anything is good or bad, we would be at the mercy of immediate and impromptu behavior, in which case, really, civilization wouldn't last very long. So we have, it's an enormous topic. I'd like to continue, but to wrap up this section, or to conclude this section, I'd like to say there's much more to the idea of free will that is contained in Dr. Harris's books. As a matter of fact, I'm kind of amused if you go into the area, if you go into a laboratory, if you go into a room where a neuroscientist or any other scientist is operating, in this particular case neuroscience, you'll see on the shelf volumes and volumes and volumes about neuroscience and the process of unconscious, pre-conscious, or conscious thought. So I'm amused at that because I always think of the philosopher Hegel, who said after he was being examined for his doctoral degree, but Mr. Hegel, after 5 years, if you only presented a paper of 10 pages to defend your thesis, whereupon Dr. Hegel, well at that time Mr. Hegel, responded, well, if you gave me 10 years, I would have only given you 5 pages. So that's my amusing thought to end this portion of the discussion. I'd love to continue at another time. Thank you very much.
This book is written by a man, a self-proclaimed atheist named Samuel Harris, who claims that there's no such thing as free will, that it's merely an illusion. In fact, he's of the school in neuroscience which doesn't even believe consciousness exists, that it is an illusion created by the brain. It reminds me of a popular philosophical idea going back to Friedrich Nietzsche about how we're basically material objects no better than rocks. And my biggest critique of this book is that the science that it presents is incomplete. And he speaks as though all neuroscientists agree with his presuppositions about the nature of consciousness, and that is not true at all. In fact, Karl Pribram, who I've read extensively about, also believed that human consciousness exists outside the human brain, that you can't... Now, Karl Pribram, going along with several German neuroscientists, going back to the 1930s, have long believed that thoughts aren't in fact stored in the human brain. And that simply by understanding how a nerve synapse fires doesn't explain to you what a human thought is. And Pribram believed that the human brain was more like a television receiver or a radio transponder. It was merely a physical device that allowed whatever consciousness is to interact with this physical world that we live in. And the radical materialists like this Samuel Harris, or Sam Harris as he likes to call himself, are very much Cartesian, the followers of the teachings of Descartes, that, whose, famous statement was, cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. And Pribram rejects this idea that, of a purely material world, the world of the clockmaker. And at the heart of what Sam Harris believes is that simply because these scientists have been able to duplicate and prove that, that the human sensory apparatus doesn't work in the way we think it works, that somehow negates that this experience that we all have as human beings of being conscious is real. And he wants to argue, and he argues in this book, that we're not in control of anything. In fact, there is no we that interprets reality. That all our consciousness is a byproduct of certain biochemical, electrical chemical processes in the brain, and through those processes, the brain creates this illusion of consciousness. Therefore, he argues that how can we hold anyone morally accountable, or how could we believe that there is any person that's making volitional choices? So at the heart of his idea of free will is an attack on the idea of consciousness. And I think that that's the major problem with this, is that you're talking about a nihilistic philosophy, even more nihilistic than Nietzsche or anyone else, about the nature of humanity. And this is part and parcel with this whole eugenics agenda going back, at least 300 years, going back to Malthus, who believed that human beings are refuse, that, that there is nothing of them in value, and therefore, there's no problem with eliminating them from the planet. They're not real. And the thoughts and feelings and emotions and lives and, the plenitude of diversity in this world is merely an illusion, because ultimately all people are glorified rocks. Or as my son says, which has been taught in almost every single biology class that he's taken at Stony Brook University, that human beings are merely bacterial colonies that have created the illusion of consciousness in order to create cohesion among the various bacteria. This, I think, is the scientific critique of this book, is that this is not the fullness of what all scientists. This is a very narrow perspective of a certain number of primarily atheist scientists who have a very definite anti-Christian, anti-religious bias. Sam Harris, of course, was raised in Hollywood. He himself admits that he had no religious training, no exposure to any kind of religious perspective growing up. And I don't think he really understands what the nature of of the spirituality or the understanding of kind of an Orthodox perspective, which I've talked about many times and over the last 20 years, about what Orthodox spirituality entails, and how it's not simply a series of dogmas and doctrines based on speculation that's going on in the human brain. That the Orthodox have always believed that revelation is the basis of human experience, and that the saints were those that had perceived or seen a greater part of reality, had seen beyond the world of the five senses to what lies beneath it. That, they've seen the uncreated energies, and his rejection of Christianity, of this belief system, this kind of rigid Calvinism, which beneath the surface of all of his discussions on free will, he's rejecting this Anselmian view that that somehow that there's a vengeful, wrathful God who desires to punish people when in fact they don't have the capacity to do good. And this was Calvin's basic teaching in his Institutes of Christian Religion, which I read many, many years ago. And in that book, Calvin basically believed that, what would later be espoused by Jonathan Edwards in the Great Awakening, as they called it in the 1700s. Well, the central tenet of Calvinism was that man didn't have free will, that the will was bound. I mean, this was even more extreme than Luther, who didn't believe in that man could do anything good, and that man had any capacity to do the right thing. From an Orthodox perspective, we would accept the idea that a person stuck in his passions is not capable of saving himself. But we've also believed that God has provided for the church therapies, a means by which that we can cleanse ourselves of the passions, that we can cleanse our hearts, so as the Beatitudes say, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And that there are those in this world, human beings, that have managed to accomplish this feat. We would call them saints. We would say that they were on the path to, as St. Athanasius said, to attaining the character of God. We would call them God-seers, those that have seen God. And Sam Harris, I think, wants to believe that that people are not accountable in the same sense that Calvin believed, that we can't do the good, but he doesn't want to embrace the entire wrath and penal system that comes with that doctrine. Numerous times in this book, he makes lamentations about and provides, kind of examples of various acts, like killing a woman and the motivation that could cause someone to kill a woman. If someone was, tormented, from the time they were a child and beaten, that their moral behavior would be less culpable. If someone were just a pure psychopath and just enjoyed killing women. What he was calling was for compassion and understanding, because he personally believes that no one is capable of doing any other act than what they do. That every act is caused, and that the human beings do what their bodies and brains tell them to do. And the irony, of course, is from an Orthodox perspective, is we believe that the passions do cause people to sin. But we also believe that a person can transcend it, that through prayer and fasting and the therapies of the church, a person can overcome the passions. And that we have a choice in this life. We can choose to take the wide way that is well paved and many find it, or we can choose the narrow gate, to choose the way that leads to salvation. Now, being a materialist, he doesn't believe in the immortal soul. He doesn't believe in resurrection. He doesn't believe in miracles in the typical atheist fashion. But I think it is hard. And this is why I read this book, and even though I understand that he's part of this philosophical tradition which leads ultimately to death, that there's some quality of goodness in this man, in his rejection of the full import of what that doctrine of no free will, which has worked its way out through Protestantism, through the multiple wars that have been fought on that basis. In one way, I was sympathetic to him, because for someone that is struggling to find a middle ground, to reach out to this idea of compassion for the sinner, compassion for those that are criminals, and to find, based on an understanding of neuroscience about how the brain works, and how volition works, and how we make the choices in our lives, and how the predations of our lives can cause us to make bad choices. And it happens, everyone knows, about circumstances that are happening in their lives. They were under tremendous stress, or things have happened to them, and they've caused them to do things that they would later regret. Or as St. Paul said in his epistle, there are things that that the things I do, I don't, the things I want to do, I don't have the strength to do, and I find that the things I don't want to do, I do. And I think that this is the heart of the problem. Now, he wants to try to find some refuge from this central spiritual dilemma of human beings in science. And I know a lot of scientists, including those that are now in kind of a spiritual deception, plani, as they would say in Greek, because they want to believe that science is going to be this great harbinger, of justice and mercy and goodness. But by and large, the scientific advancements have been used only for evil intent. I mean, I think about cell phones, and just to make an aside, that a cell phone is very much akin to a human brain, because a cell phone takes data and processes it, and creates an image. And the same thing that a television receiver does. And simply proving that the human brain works in the same way as the device that we've managed to create doesn't negate the idea that consciousness exists. Because there had to be a creator, a mind behind that to have created it. And this is the problem with all of evolutionary theory and everything else that's going on, is that in the entire scientific community, is that they want to have their devices. They want to reduce human beings to simply the level of a device, but they want a device that somehow magically came into being, organized with channels and circuitry, simply because you can demonstrate that there are patterns in the way the human brain works. Doesn't mean that that's all that there is. That doesn't mean that there isn't an observer, just as there are or audiences in a movie theater, or someone sitting there watching that TV screen, that there isn't a consciousness that's interacting with that device. They don't believe that persons exist. They don't believe there is anything interacting. They think that the that the brain's simply creating the illusion, of your individual consciousness. Sam Harris and all the neuroscientists that follow him. That's why he'll argue there's no free will, because there is no person to make a decision. There's no person to make a decision. There can't be free will because there are no wills to make a choice. Now, I will agree with him that what determines oftentimes how we behave, what we do with those choices, is dependent upon experiences that we had up to the moment we have to make those choices. But that doesn't mean that those choices are programmed to the extent that we could not resist that conditioning, or that there could be individuals with exactly the same conditioning that would make different choices. Whenever they want absolutes, they don't want to live in a world in which they could be wrong. They want to have this smug attitude, as I've seen the interviews, and that I have the truth and you don't. I mean, it's the same kind of religious dogmatic attitude of the fundamentalist preacher that they claims I've said the magic words, I accept Christ as my personal Lord and Savior, therefore I now have a guarantee that I'm going to go to heaven. It's no longer a struggle for me. It's the same kind of smugness, and that's why I think at heart these people, even though they appear to have rejected a religious life, they've simply fallen back into the same pattern. They've embraced another philosophy, one that is, I think, in its own way, is equally pernicious. And he may have all the best intentions of the world, but the people that are promoting him, that are giving him money, that are sending him out on lecture tours, that are making his books bestsellers, they have a far more nefarious agenda behind. It's their goal to discredit all religious life, and to characterize all religious life as merely an illusion and a delusion. And the very religious system that he wants to eradicate, being an atheist, I think is the only bulwark to prevent the kind of psychopathic world that these nihilists want to impose on the rest of us.